All right, well, welcome everyone. This is our third webinar in the KM KSU webinar series. Just to remind everybody that this is an open forum and everyone is welcome. We're talking about all topics KM. Before we get started today, hold on. Could I ask everybody to mute yourself as well when you come on? And we'll manage the background noise a bit. Thank you. Okay. Hold on. All right. So today we have a speaker who I'm sure many of you are familiar with and is someone I've known for, I think, now 17 years. Seth Kahan has been called a visionary by many and some very important associations as well. Let me just continue to mute people. And today, hold on, we've got. Sorry. So Seth has been designated a thought leader and an exemplar in change leadership by the Society for Advancement of Consulting. The Center for Association Leadership also conferred upon him the title of visionary. And I can speak to his foresight and visionary thinking as well. Seth and I worked together for several years at the World Bank when the World Bank was first starting out on its knowledge management journey. So Seth has worked with over 30 executives, including the supervision of large-scale change programs at the Royal Dutch Shell, at the World Bank, and Peace Corps. He specializes in association leadership and includes over 25 association CEOs among his clients. Many of you will remember Seth as one of the thought leaders also in storytelling and business narrative. So what I'm going to do is not take any further time for you speaking myself, but I'm going to turn this over to Seth and let him talk to you about getting innovation right. This is another very important topic in KM. Seth, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to mute myself.
All right, Denise, before you do that, just want to make sure, can you hear me loud and clear?
Oh, Seth, may I tell everyone that I'm going to be watching the chat. So if you have a question for Seth, would you please put it in the chat, and then I will alert him to when we have questions so that he can stop and chat with you all.
Thank you. Are you able to hear me all right, Denise?
We're able to hear you fine.
Great. Thank you very much, Denise. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And yes, it's true, Denise and I did work together at the World Bank. It was a great time. It was a time when we were pushing a new frontier, and it was a very exciting time to be part of that project. I left the World Bank in 2002 and began consulting on my own at that time. And when I first left the World Bank, the majority of consulting engagements that I received were from leaders who had something specific that they wanted to implement. So for example, at Royal Dutch Shell, they wanted to put technology down into the ground, and they wanted to use it to monitor the wells, oil and gas fields. The World Bank had knowledge management. The Peace Corps was responding to the changing demographics. They wanted to include African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics, and elderly professionals. These were all examples where a leader said, I know what I want to do. And Seth, what I need from you is I need help in getting uptake, getting buy-in, getting participation. And I did that for about 6 years until 2008. And in 2008, when the economy tanked, everything changed. And leaders began coming to me, and instead of saying, I know what I want to do, help me get the support to make it so, they said, I don't know what to do. I don't know where we should go from here. I'm afraid that we're losing customers. I'm afraid that we're losing market share. I'm afraid that we're losing members. I'm afraid we're not getting value right. How do we innovate in this environment? And so my work shifted dramatically, and I began focusing a lot more on innovation. And what I discovered after being involved in probably the first 25 or 30 innovation projects was that there were two kinds of leaders. There were leaders who consistently got innovation right, and there were those who didn't. And those who did not depended on haphazard serendipity circumstance for their success. Sometimes they would get things right and not know why they got things right. Those leaders who did get innovation right, they were doing things differently. And like any endeavor, if you look at the people who are doing really well, what you find out is that they're doing their homework. They're doing all the invisible things. They're preparing themselves for all the adverse circumstances or difficult challenges that can come their way, the disruptions, so that when they come, they're ready. And what I started doing was documenting what it was they were doing, how they were preparing themselves so that they could consistently and systematically achieve success in the marketplace. And that is how I define innovation. I know when I talk with other people, when you look at the popular literature and people talk about innovation, they talk about being creative, experimenting, having a tolerance for failure, creating open environments. And while all of those are necessary prerequisites, and I don't quibble with any of them, the way I define innovation is when you are able to take a new product or service or idea or offering of some kind to market successfully. And what does success mean? Success means that there are at least two parties who are very happy. There's the customer or the member, or if you're in government, it's the public, the beneficiary. And then there's the provider. The provider is the person who's providing the service, providing the product, providing the idea. And both parties have to be getting what they really want and have to be satisfied, satiated. If you are providing a product or service for a profit, you have to be making so much money that you can reinvest in that profit, that you can help your customers to have a positive experience. And of course, if you're the customer, you have to be applying that idea, that service, that product in a way that really gives you satisfaction. Both of those things have to happen, and that's what I call success. So when I talk about getting innovation right, I'm talking about leaders who are succeeding in the market, leaders who are, if you're in the government, they're succeeding with the public. If you're an association, you're succeeding with their members. And if you're a private sector organization, you're succeeding with their customers. So what I'm saying here is that the, let's see now, I'm having, there we go. If I could boil all this down into 30 seconds and you had to leave the teleconference now, what I would say is that this is about being prepared. This is about doing your homework. This is about taking care of those things that will ensure your success when it comes to your customers, your beneficiaries actually using what it is that you created and getting wonderful results out of it, and you getting the remuneration, the reward that comes from that, so that you can reinfuse it with new ideas and you can be continuously improving the offering that you're putting in the market. So the umbrella thought over this whole thing is this is how you be prepared. This is how you prepare for success if you're doing innovation. Now, what I've distilled here are 7 key activities that leaders do who succeed in the market. And I've worked with now over 100 leaders on innovation projects, and I can tell you that most of them don't do all 7. In fact, most of them only do 1 or 2, and they don't do it systematically. They don't do it consistently. They don't do it throughout the organization. But those that do all 7, or most of them, put the odds greatly in their favor. And I've had the opportunity to work on a number of projects that have succeeded remarkably in the marketplace or in government, and I've seen the effects of somebody who does all 7. So let me go through the 7 and share them with you. The first one is pursue and leverage inflection points. First off, what is an inflection point? An inflection point is a decisive shift between your offering and the market. It can be in your favor, it can be very positive, or it can be out of your favor, it can be negative. An example of a positive inflection point from the point of view of Apple was in 2010 when they sold 14 million iPads. The world would never be the same again. Apple would never be the same again. A decisive shift took place between Apple and the market. And those 14 million iPads changed the way that people work forever. Now, that's a positive inflection point for Apple, but it's a negative inflection point for others. Imagine if you were involved in selling printing equipment, the large multi-million-dollar machines that had the job of putting ink or some kind of substrate on paper and creating brochures, menus, packaging, labels, what have you. For them, for the printing equipment manufacturers, this was a negative inflection point. The market shifted dramatically around the globe in a way that it would never return to where it was before, and it moved away from them. So what I'm saying here is that leaders who succeed in the market pursue these inflection points. They try and look around the corner of the future. They try and understand what change is coming that's going to change my relationship to the market dramatically. And then they try and leverage them. If you were to look at negative inflection points, there are two kinds, basically. There's a vertical drop, which is here on my screen labeled as number 1, and there's a step down, which is labeled as number 2. The vertical drop is moving from left to right, something that comes down very quickly, levels out for a short period of time, and then moves down very quickly again. This is a bad inflection point if you're in business. This means it's over. You're cooked. This is an inflection point that predicts your demise. That downward arrow at the end is destruction, oblivion, doom. It's over. However, the negative inflection point to the right of it, number 2, which is the step down, is not necessarily the end. It means that there's been a decisive shift away from the market for your organization, but you're not necessarily cooked. You could still recover, and in fact, you can level out in a lower place than where you started. These are the 2 primary examples of negative inflection points. Now let's look at positive inflection points. Number 3 here is a soar up. You're moving up vertically, you level out for a little while, and then you move back into a vertical climb again. And number 4 is the step up. It's a gradual. Everybody says they want a number 3. They want to soar up. They want a vertical climb. But the truth is that vertical climbs are very difficult to manage. Vertical climbs require massive changes in infrastructure, support, capacity building. I don't know if you remember, there was a great internet commercial many years ago on TV when the internet was first popular. And there was a group of people who had a product that they were selling, and they were crowded around their computer screen, and their website went live. And they were kind of holding their breath to see if anybody was going to buy their product. And then one person bought it, and everybody's eyebrows went up in excitement. And then 3 people bought it, and then 5 people, and then 10 people. And smiles started growing on their faces. And then it was 100 people buying it. They started slapping each other on the backs, and 200, 300, and they were ecstatic. And then suddenly the number jumped up to like 5,000, 15,000, 30,000, 100,000, 500,000, 800,000 purchases. And they sat there with their mouths hanging open, wondering how they would ever be able to serve that kind of a client base. That's a vertical climb. You have to be ready for really an infusion of dramatic proportions when it comes to resources to survive well in a vertical climb. The step up, number 4, is much more gradual and much more typical, and it allows one to get a breather. So you have a swoop up as you move to the right in time, a short vertical climb, and then a leveling out. And that gives you time to build capacity, to hire new staff, to build your infrastructure, to train people, or to even just serve customers. Maybe you have a rapid increase in market penetration, and here's an opportunity to make sure those people have a positive experience. Now, these 4 inflection points that I'm sharing with you, the negatives and the positives, can be combined, and they can create a whole variety of circumstances in the market. And one of the circumstances that people are most often interested in is the turnaround. Turnaround is where you have a company that's plummeting, they're dropping, and you want to shift them into an ascent, and you want to bring them back up again. A turnaround is made of 3 different inflection points here. First, you have the negative one that I described on the first page there, where you're going from a plummet, basically, a vertical drop down, into a leveling out. And then you take that flatter line there, and you move it into a mild ascent. And eventually, you're able to push it into a soar. Now, if you've ever worked with the CEO, or if you are the CEO of a company that's experienced a turnaround, you know that you generally have to engineer these three activities separately. I've had the good fortune to be part of at least 2 dramatic turnarounds. And when I see the CEO come in and be very intentional about changing the organization's relationship to the market, the first thing they try to do is stop that drop. And they use a variety of techniques. They might send people on furlough. They might take a cut. One CEO I know suspended his own pay and took a percentage cut of everybody else's pay and instituted furloughs at the same time. You can narrow down the market that you're serving. Maybe you have 7 segments and you decide you're only going to serve 2 and you stop serving the other 5. You put financial systems in place so that you can keep an eye on your key indicators. Then once you start to level out, once you start to get stability, then you need to shift to ascent. You can't keep everybody on furlough forever. You can't keep people's salaries slashed forever. And once your financial systems are in place, you want to start using them to fine-tune your operations. And so you need to start to invest in your organization to shift to an ascent. And then once you start that upward curve, now you're finally in a position where you can move yourself into a vertical climb if that's what you want to do and soar. But you can't just do that straight from the drop. So here you see a turnaround as 3 different inflection points kind of cobbled together to create the desired effect. Now, before I leave this, I just want to share, thinking about inflection points is a different way to think. And many leaders don't think this way. They are looking at key indicators. They're looking at revenue generation. They're looking at membership counts. They're looking at how well different products and services are doing in the market. But what they're not thinking about is how the entire organization and its mission is doing in relation to the market. What are the external factors that can cause an inflection point? And what are the internal factors that are under their control that they can use to cause an inflection point? And so one of the key differences I see between leaders who are successfully, systematically implementing innovation and getting the results they want, and those who are shooting in the dark, is that they're thinking in terms of inflection points. They're trying to suss them out in advance. They're using intelligence efforts, which I'll talk about in some detail to come. They're looking at the overall operations, and they're building capacity for innovation so that they can dramatically shift their relationship to the market. And then they're preparing for that so that they have the resources, the capacity to respond. And that's the first one, pursue and leverage inflection points. The second point is building innovation capacity. If innovation is part of your mission, if it's going to be part of your DNA, if you're going to consider yourself an organization that thrives on innovation, that's continuously introducing new products and services, where your customers are looking forward to the next update, they're looking forward to the next offering, they're waiting in eager anticipation for something cool that you're going to provide them, then you have to build innovation capacity, because it's not a one-shot deal. It's a way of life. And innovation has inherent stresses. There's no way around it. The first thing that innovation is in conflict with is operations. And operations, that's keeping your doors open. That's responding to customer crisis. That's managing cash flow. That's all the things it takes to just run a business. And it requires a different mindset to keep that cash flow coming in, to manage it in the proper way, to deal with talent, to work with customers, than it does to introduce something different in the marketplace and manage the response. So people who are interested in making innovation part of their organizational culture have to build the capacity for it, because it will be in conflict with operations. And if it ever comes to a choice between the two, which do we pursue, operations or innovation? We will always choose operations. It's like when you sit down with your checkbook, to pay your bills, and you think to yourself, I really want that cool new piece of exercise equipment. I've been dreaming about it for a long time. It's $500. It's a lot of money, but I know that it's going to be a lot of fun to have. And you sit there and you pay, your wireless phone bill, and then you pay your cable, and then you pay your mortgage, and then you pay your electricity, and then you pay your gas, and then you look at the end, and what have you got left over? You've got maybe a couple $100 left over. What are you going to do? Are you going to not pay your mortgage and buy the exercise equipment? Not if you're in it for the long haul. You're going to pay that mortgage. You're going to sacrifice on that fancy new thing that you want. Well, it's the same thing with operations and innovation. If a manager has to make a choice between keeping the ship running and starting something new, they'll always choose keeping the ship running, as they should. There shouldn't be a conflict. So part of the leader's job is to set up the culture and the business processes so that the two don't conflict, so that choice doesn't have to be made. There are other stresses that innovation brings. One is the market responsiveness. If you're introducing something new into the market, you don't know what the market's going to do with it. Is it going to take it and run it? Is it going to resist it at first? And that creates stress. So you have to build a capacity inside the organization. And that capacity, that foundation for these stresses, is really made up of three specific things. The first is leadership. Leadership is tasked with specific activities that support innovation. One of them is to communicate clearly, to provide the vision. Another is to go out and meet people who are part of the new world. They might be alliances, partners, thought leaders. Another is to build partnerships, to look at forging relationships, alliances that can help with the new innovation. So leadership is critical to an innovation foundation. Talent is critical. Having talent to keep the trains running is very different than acquiring or developing talent to move into a new area. So if you're going to push forward into a creative space where you don't already own it, you're going to need the right kind of people. And the last is idea management. Idea management is something that is undervalued and little understood in most organizations today. There are organizations that are doing very well with it. Coca-Cola comes to mind. The city of Chicago comes to mind. Organizations are using software like Spigot, where idea management is being done in wonderful ways. There has to be a high tolerance for half-baked ideas in the beginning because no idea emerges fully cooked and ready to roll. And there have to be particular protocols for experts to weigh in, to massage it, to winnow it, to grow it, to develop it. And there have to be specific decision gateways. And even a good idea may not be worth rolling out. It may not make business sense. So understanding how to take ideas as they bubble up from customers and from internally in the organization and develop them appropriately and then make decisions about which ones to implement and which ones to not, that's capacity that supports innovation. So here are the three things that are really required in order to have the foundation to handle those stresses I was describing earlier: leadership, talent, and idea management. The third thing I want to talk about is collecting intelligence. And this is so much easier to do today than it ever has been in the history of time. Google and the internet has made more possible here than we could even possibly imagine. Intelligence, when you're looking at introducing a new product or service, is critical. There's all kinds of information that's out there that will tell you whether or not you'll be successful in advance. And good leaders, smart leaders, mine that intelligence and bring it to bear before they introduce something new. There's three areas in particular that it's critical to take a look at. The first is the market. I'm working, for example, with a trade association that's in the rental space. The rental space is a booming market. We've had the mortgage crisis. People don't have jobs. Everybody's renting. Urbanization, people moving to the cities, has been steadily a 3% growth space for decades now. There are even books being written about how renting is part of the new American dream. For 50 years, owning a house was the American dream. Now people are starting to talk about how saving money on your mortgage can actually help you achieve the things that are most important in your life. So you need to understand the market. Working in the rental space is very different than working in the printing equipment space, as I described earlier, where you have a collapse, a contraction. You have a Darwinian situation where large companies are eating smaller companies. Now, you can grow in either one, but you need to understand it in order to do that. The second area where you need to collect intelligence is with your customers. Do you have your finger on their pulse? Do you know what they're thinking? Are there opportunities that you're harvesting? Are there challenges that you're facing? Are there potential customers that you're winning over? You need to have a way to stay in contact with the customers. And in the book, I provide 10 steps that show you all the different touch points at which you are actually interacting with customers. And the first one is even before you have a formal connection of any kind. It's when your customer first hears about you, which is often through word of mouth or advertising or some other indirect source. The third area where you must collect intelligence is understanding your own capacity. What is it that you can do? So, for example, if you're going to move to a world-class operation, do you have a world-class marketing and outreach effort? Do you have world-class customer service? Do you have world-class internal communications? Do you have world-class data mining? And so on. So as you chart your way forward, you need to understand what are the weaknesses of my organization, what are its strengths, and how do we need to build it. So a basic intelligence effort includes these three and then combines them in a recommendation that shows how the organization can best grow. On to the next one. The fourth area that leaders consistently excel at who succeed at innovation is the ability to shift perspective. This is really challenging. We get trapped in our own view of the world. We lock into our own mental models. And leaders who are very good at innovating are good at stepping outside of those mental models. And there's 4 different ways that I provide in the book, techniques that you can use for getting outside of your own brain and looking at the world in a way that opens up innovation opportunities. The first one is to isolate the steps in your value chain. Know all the different pieces where you add value and break them down and analyze them. I'll give you an example of that in just a minute. The next is to become your own competition. Step outside your building and imagine you were trying to compete with your organization. What would you do? How would you do it? This is something that can be challenging for senior teams because it requires being politically incorrect. You have to figure out how to take yourself down. But that exposes weak spots. And seeking out weak spots in your organization is a critical way to shift perspective. So for example, if you have a CEO who's entrepreneurial, doing very well in the market, but he's also impulsive, if you were another organization, you might dangle a carrot in front of that CEO, thinking they'll go after it, invest resources, and then you'll be free to claim a space. So again, this requires talking about things that might be politically incorrect, but it also opens you up to understanding where opportunities are for innovating and how to evolve. And the fourth one is to look for creative deviants. These are people who do things differently than everybody else, but get a good result. They're people who work outside the system, but have success to show for it. I remember at the World Bank, when we were first doing knowledge management, we were looking for someone who was really good at building a community of practice. And we found a creative deviant. There was a guy who was in charge of the highway department. He was both a world-class guru and he was also a social architect. We had a lot of world-class gurus at the World Bank, but we didn't have hardly any social architects, and we didn't have any world-class gurus who were social architects. So we learned a lot from this guy, and we were able to replicate that. So you want to find the people who are operating outside the norm, but getting results. So now let me give you a quick example of isolating the steps in the value chain. I'm going to talk here about one particular example, a company that makes reports for the metal industry. What this means is that they gather data that will give people in metal industries a financial edge on the market. That's how they make their money. They sell these reports, and they create profits from that activity, and that's their whole business model. So let's take a look at the steps that they go through when they create one of these reports. This is their value chain. These steps, each one of them represents a place where they're able to add value. The first thing they do is a client interview. They contact all the people who are going to be buying the reports, and they ask them what they want. These interviews yield data requirements. So now they know what to go after. So maybe they talk to the XYZ steel company, and they say, we'd really like to see the tonnage of steel that's being shipped from China. Okay, so now they know. They need to go out and gather the tonnage of steel being shipped from China. Then they go out and they gather the data. They find out how much steel is being shipped from China. Then they correlate the data. And maybe they discover, for example, that steel shipments from China are directly related to movements in the railroad industry in South America and Canada. So now they have a correlation. Then they take that correlated data and they analyze it. Now they bring in the experts to look at it, to sift over the charts, to draw conclusions. And from those conclusions, they construct numerical reports. So there's got now, spreadsheets, statistics, numbers that they're showing. And they, of course, have to turn those into narratives because you can't just give someone a bunch of numbers and expect them to interpret it. You need to provide some kind of storyline so that people know how to look at the report. And they document this and they give it to the client. So now they're giving the client a combination of numerical reports and the narrative. And then they start the process over again. Well, let's see, there we go. They do a follow-up interview once they give it to the client. So here you have a set of steps that they go through in their business model. And each step along the way, they add value. They do something special that makes their reports particularly valuable to their clients. Now, I'm giving you an example of how to shift perspective. So this example is called isolating steps in the value chain. Here we've got the steps in the value chain for the metal industry reports. Now let's pick one of them. I'm going to pick The interview yields data requirements. Okay, so now you're at the stage where you've already talked to all your clients, you know what they want, and you're starting to look at what kind of requirements do I have to go out and gather. Now, I must add value here. My company that creates these reports does something special. What is it? Well, how well am I doing at understanding the data requirements based on the client interview? For example, do I have young interns pouring through the client interviews who have no experience in the metal industry deciding what the data requirements are? Or do I have metal experts who can read between the lines, who can detect nuances in the way people express themselves and ask for things, who can see requirements emerge that aren't necessarily explicit? That's a place where I can add value. That's where I can shift perspective. If I've got an expert on the phone or an expert listening to those audio interviews, then they're able to pick up nuances that can turn into new reports that we might not even be producing today. They might listen to 4 different interviews and realize that everybody's interested in the tonnage of steel being shipped from China. And then they would ask themselves the question, why is that? I wonder what's going on with steel shipping in China. And they might do some background. And they might discover that China has recently upped its steel manufacturing. And they want to know why. And they start looking for answers to that question. And soon they discover that steel is becoming a niche market for China. And this starts to generate for them perhaps 2 or 3 sets of new reports that they can sell to clients. Okay, so you start to see how here by unpacking a single step, you start to be able to get outside of your model and look at new possibilities. That's what I mean by isolating steps in the value chain. I'll just do one more real fast. Let's look at the narrative that's being created. Who's creating that story? Who's looking at the numbers? Who's deciding what's the story they tell? Is it somebody who is a subject matter expert? What if it were somebody who's a CEO of a metal company? What if it were somebody who could really use the talk, the jargon, the point of view of somebody who's really using these reports to their maximum? What might they want? What kind of stories might be important? Maybe there's an opportunity there to take that CEO who's creating the narrative from the numerical reports and start having him do a podcast or an audio download that could be sold. And it could be sold because that CEO is bringing so much value to the story that people are able to generate new business as a result of it. Okay, another example of isolating a step in the value chain and using it to open up new perspective. Let's go to the next area that leaders use to get an edge when it comes to innovation. Exploiting disruption. Everybody hates disruption. That's what they say. No, that's not what they say. There's some people who love disruption. Why? Well, disruption is a massive energy shift. There are 4 primary areas where disruption takes place. But if you're able to stand back and instead of thinking of it as something awful that's going to destroy you, think of it as movement, force in the market. And if you can get on the good side of that force, you can use it to your advantage. It's like looking at a tidal wave and discovering that you can use it to power a generator. So what are the 4 areas where we experience disruption? The first is our own customers are facing challenges. Maybe they're having difficulty with cash flow. Maybe their business is being turned upside down. Maybe they're under so much stress they're making poor decisions and they're asking us for things that are really not in their best interest. Like they're slashing their investments and they want lower costs and they don't care if the customer service drops and they don't care if it sabotages their ability to work over the long haul. So our customers could be facing challenges. Second, industries are upending. I gave the example of the iPad and the print industry. An entire industry is turned upside down overnight. That's a form of disruption. Third is competition is fierce. New people are moving into the marketplace. And the fourth is new business models. There's new ways of generating income. So these forces of disruption create chaos in the market, but there are people who are experts at sussing this chaos out and figuring out how to put it to advantage. What they're looking at is what's called a window of opportunity. And I've got this opportunity window here mapped out for you. You see, on the left, we've got the satisfaction axis. Up is positive, good satisfaction, people are happy. Down is negative, people are upset, scrambled, challenged, angry, confused. And you've got time moving left to right. Anytime satisfaction dips below the 0 point and people become angry, upset, confused, negative, there's an opportunity for something to happen to address that. Anytime that people are discontent, there's an opportunity for satisfaction. And that's a critical piece of the puzzle. You can serve them what they want at that point if you can figure out what it is. And that's what people who look at disruption positively do. All right, I've been going on for quite a long time here. I'm about a little over halfway through the 7 areas. Why don't we just pause for a moment? I'm sure that there's questions. Let me take some questions, and then I'll come back to complete the presentation. Denise, how are we doing with chats and questions?
I think everybody's just trying to absorb all of this. It's so great. We haven't had any specific questions yet. Let me just make a comment, though.
Yes, please.
You know what, I've already told people on chat that there are 2 things that I'm taking away from this right now. I love the idea of the exploding disruption. And the other term that you use, the other concept, is a social architect. I think this means that we're really beginning to take this aspect seriously. I really like that idea. The other thing that's really striking me right now is, you know, we've always included business intelligence sort of in that big sphere of knowledge management, but I don't know that I've ever seen anybody connect the 2 as well as you have done today. And that's really exciting to me. But does anybody else have any comments or questions, or is this just so exciting and interesting that, oh, actually Jessica has a question. She would like you to talk a little bit more about a social architect. What is it, and what do they do?
Sure. Social architects design social experiences. They pull people together. They broker knowledge. I'll give you an example from my own work. When I was at the World Bank during the last year there, I worked with Jim Wolfenson, who was the president. And one of my jobs was to identify areas where he was not getting strategic traction and help him to create that support, uptake, buy-in. And one of those areas was he had this idea that said the poor had to become partners in creating solutions. That there were so many poor people on the planet, and their growth rate was so far outnumbering the growth rate of those in the developed world, that if we didn't make them our partners, collaborators, we would fail at the mission of alleviating poverty. He was saying this, but he wasn't getting any uptake with it. People weren't behaving differently. They were still treating the poor as primarily beneficiaries. And so it was my job to figure out how to change that dynamic. So what I did, the first thing was I went out looking for people who were experts at making the poor partners. And I found them quite easily, actually. It was serendipity, but in the window of the World Bank bookstore was a book called Voices of the Poor. And it was edited by Deepa Narayan, and there were probably about 25 people represented as authors in there. And these were all people who were experts at involving the poor and creating their own solutions. So I met with Deepa, and I asked her if she'd like to have an audience with the president and help him address this problem and bring the other people along. And she said, of course. Now, you see what I'm doing here is I'm engineering an experience. I'm pulling together a group of people. I've got a president in need, and I've found some experts who have some relevant knowledge and experience, and I'm starting to bring them together. We pulled them together in a small break room in the World Bank. We served them, appetizers and Cokes and coffee, and the president had a great interaction with them, and he shared with them he had some particular issues that he was facing. One is that he needed grassroots communication in the organization to increase. 2 was he needed an elevator speech. He said, I'm going to have 3 minutes on a dais with a head of state, and I have to be able to convince them why collaborating with the poor is a good idea. And the 3rd, he needed the deep knowledge. He said, I want the 3-ring binder in case that head of state decides to have me out for dinner and we have a long conversation about collaborating with the poor. I need to understand what it means, what works and what doesn't. So we had 3 needs. And so this group began to work together to give him to satisfy those needs. And I sat in that whole conversation. Now, I was not an expert in collaborating with the poor. I was not an expert at running the World Bank, but I was the social architect. I listened to the conversations, I took notes, and then I decided what are the follow-up activities that have to happen. What are the subgroups from the people in this room who need to meet again? Who needs to meet again with the president? Who's not in the room who should meet with the president? Where do we go from here? And over the course of 6 months, I engineered 6 meetings to satisfy this strategic need. We worked together until Wolfenson had satisfaction in all 3 of the areas he wanted, and then we disbanded. So it was my role to listen to the need and that was present in terms of knowledge, and then to design interactions that would satisfy the need. That's what a social architect does. Is that helpful?
That was wonderful. Thank you. Now that's generated a couple more questions. We have a question
Right.
from Jackie, and let me just say that the only reason I'm relaying these questions is because it helped us to maintain the background noise. But Jackie asked, could you address the viability, desirability of creating a culture of innovation organization-wide versus fostering pockets of innovation or having what she calls a skunk works approach where certain areas drive innovation?
Sure, that's a really great question. It really depends on the mission of the organization. There are some organizations that need to have a culture of innovation across the board because of their role in the world. Most organizations, though, do operate with pockets, even that sometimes the pockets can be very large. They could even, you could say, oh, you have a pocket that's 60% of the organization, but it's still confined. And then you have to manage the boundary between the two. So you really have to turn yourself to the mission of the organization and ask the question, where do we need stability? Where do we need continuous innovation? Is there enough overlap that we want everybody to be working on innovation, or do we want it confined? And if so, how? There are some organizations that have, I think the World Bank is a good example. When we introduced knowledge management in the World Bank, I think we involved directly about 2,000 out of 10,000 people when we were in our heyday. And I think that's actually probably still a pretty good percentage. So you're talking about 20% of the organization. That's huge. In a $20 billion organization, that's a massive amount of people. But it's not even 50% because the other 80% of the people are delivering on projects, booking travel arrangements, doing loan disbursement, monitoring data. And so that's the right number for that organization. Every organization has a right percentage, and you have to look at it. Now, I'm working with an organization today that is in an extremely high growth market, and they have 80 people. They have 23 million customers, and they've grown from in the last 12 years. I think they had 4 million customers 12 years ago, and they're planning to double to go to 46 million customers in the next 5 years. They are going to be an innovation culture. Everything is going to change. Not just the way they serve the customers, not just the products and services they provide, but the way they do business, the way they do customer service, the way they gather data, the way they do data mining, the way they monitor their finances. Every aspect of operations is going to be on almost a vertical curve. So that CEO is instituting a culture of innovation. And that's an example where it would be better to have it organization-wide rather than in a pocket or in a particular locale.
All right, I have a question from Wendy Bukowitz, who is just coincidentally going to be our speaker next week. But she says, you say that few leaders implement all 7 layers that support innovation. Which ones do most leaders implement, and why do you believe that they choose to focus on these and not the others?
Well, that's a really great question. What I see with leaders, first of all, they're not making a conscious choice mostly to focus on one or more because, well, the framework's never been presented before, so they're not thinking in terms of this model yet. But they are doing things. Now, the way I would turn your question around is I would ask, which leaders are intentional about pushing one of these 7 or more of these 7 factors throughout the organization, pushing it to where it belongs so that it's happening outside of their own head? And the answer there really depends on the leader and where their expertise and experience is. So if, for example, a leader, whoops, I just allowed Arshad to annotate, and it changed my, maybe I shouldn't have done that. It changed my form here. I'm gonna actually skip ahead since I've got this. Can I? Oh, what am I? I'm in annotation mode now. Let me get out of there. Since you asked the question, I'm going to go take a quick jump so that you can see all 7 of them. These are the 7 areas. I've only gone through the first 5. The areas where I see leaders pushing things intentionally in innovation organizations are in collecting intelligence, shifting perspective, and generating value. Those are the 3 where I see people choosing to do something about it today. Intelligence, again, is so important in the information age, and it's so readily available that leaders are able to do it at very low cost once they understand that it's a valued activity. Shifting perspective is something that innovative cultures and innovative leaders tend to be good at. That's one of their core competencies. That's what, Steve Jobs was so good at that, being able to look at things from a different angle. And generating value in the private sector has been out there for decades. It's moving now into the nonprofit space in a new way, though, and it's moving into the government in a new way. And so we're seeing more there. But generally, value generation is something that people talk about all up and down the ranks. And so those are the three areas where I see leaders, excelling those who are intentionally pushing it out today. Other questions?
Yes, we have two more. Wadi sent a question. What was interesting to me, he says, was operations being the first conflict for innovation. Can you explain more if you have time, and how can we reduce that?
Well, it's only a conflict if somebody has to make a resource decision. Do I give money, time, energy to operations, or do I give it to innovation? And when it is a conflict, the smart manager is going to choose operations because you have to keep the ship running. You can't sink. It doesn't help to have a great idea if you're taking on water. So what you do is that you have to build handshakes and firewalls between operations and innovation. When a new product or service is rolled out, there has to be a migration path into operations. You can't just throw it over to the operations people and say, go. You gotta monitor it. You gotta take feedback, especially when it's new. There's always a tremendous amount of feedback. And it's got to have gates that it passes through where it starts to seep into operations and become part of operations. But in the early stages, you should have a different kind of team, people with a different mindset managing it. So the key to balancing innovation and operations is to understand a formal relationship between the two and map that out so that people who are running operations don't get tasked with innovation willy-nilly. If they do, one of the symptoms that you'll see is managers rolling their eyes and saying things like, I've got to get to the real work now. What they're saying is, I got to keep the trains running. That's the real work. And what they're doing, of course, is belittling innovation in the same breath, and that's not a good thing. So you got to manage those gateways, those connections, those handshakes, so that they're intelligent, that the right resources and the right mindsets are in the right place at the right time. Anything else?
Seth, we have one more question, and I'm
Good.
actually going to unmute Addit so that she can ask directly.
Wonderful.
Addit, is that okay?
Sure.
Let me see if I can do that. Okay. Addit, go ahead, please. Let's see. She may not be able. Let me just ask the question. Let me ask the question on her behalf then. Could you speak to the prospects of growth in the library environment for innovation? I'm not sure I've asked that question quite right, but.
So are you talking about like in the library sector or in the library culture when you say the library sector?
In the maybe we could say it in the information sector.
Yeah. Oh, there's tremendous growth potential there, and there will be for a long time because of technology. Technology is a disruptive force. It's staying ahead of the layperson's understanding, and it likely will for a very long time. And so anybody whose job has to do with information or knowledge is in a position to achieve tremendous growth. And the primary obstacle there is the mindset. The mindset that says we have to follow rules and regulations and there's bureaucratic policies. I never advocate that you violate the rules and regulations or that you push against the hierarchy, but you need to complement it. Command and control needs to be complemented by connect and collaborate. And people with good ideas in the library space are actually in a position to lead the charge in many areas. If we're talking public libraries, they're able to lead the charge. We're moving to a whole new model of education now where it's self-driven, and it's not limited to what happens in the schools or the classroom anymore. It's happening everywhere. It's really wonderful to behold. Of course, that doesn't mean we're getting rid of schools and classrooms. It's complementing it. If you're talking about a library, I had the opportunity at the World Bank when I was there. We had 7 libraries. It was wonderful to work with the librarians. Some of our librarians were some of our brightest thinkers. There's some great work being done by the Special Libraries Association, looking at how to lead the charge and how to grow. The key, I think, is that you have to really understand your customers, what it is that they want, and you have to be ahead of them in knowing how to give them what they might not be asking for. You know, it's like Henry Ford and the question, you know, if he'd asked people, what do you want before he built his automobile, they would have said faster horses. Well, he built a car, he built the automobile. And if the librarians are asking people what they want and they start talking about different forms of media, different kinds of education, different kinds of experiential learning, the librarian has to be able to put themselves into the future and ask the question, what can I provide this person that is really speaks to a compelling need or a compelling desire, or which will create great traction. And then I think the librarians are really actually poised for significant growth. Anything else?
Excellent. I think you've hit all of our questions for now. The one comment that everybody's making is, where are the slides? Is this being recorded? Because I think they want to share it with others. So Seth, please continue.
Okay, and I'll be glad to. I'm going to see if I can wrap the slides up in the next 10 minutes here, so those folks who have to leave at 1 are able to, 1 Eastern time, that is. And I'm also happy to give the slides to you, Denise, so that you can post them wherever folks can have access to them. Actually, I think you already have a copy of them, so you can just go ahead and feel free to distribute those. The only thing I would ask is that if people use them with other people, is that they maintain my attribution. But other than that, they're free to use them.
Absolutely, and everybody knows who participates in this community that we are operating under the Creative Commons. So their instructions are there for how you're supposed to give credit and what you can and cannot do with things. So yes.
Beautiful. So here, I'm going to go now to the last two, generating value. Generating value is, like I said, something that's been alive in the private sector for a very long time, but it's new to government and to the association world, the nonprofit world. There's 3 different kinds of value when you want to create new value, when you want to build it from, extend something that's not been extended before. The first one is what I call new value. New value is a whole new area, something that you're not doing at all. It is the most difficult. It's like starting a business from scratch. So, if I, Seth Kahan, am a consultant, I do business strategy primarily. If I decided I was going to open up a McDonald's franchise, that's new value. But it has nothing to do with what I'm doing now. It's a whole new skill set. It's going to be very difficult for me to port over the skills that I have as a consultant into running a franchise. And as a result, I also have no clients who are coming to me and asking me for hamburgers. So I'm going to have to build a whole new client base. It can be done. It's done often. But it's of all 3 of the ways to generate value, it's the most difficult. The next is more value. More value is just giving people more of what they're already getting. And so you're extending value from what you have. Therefore, it's easier than new value. And the last is better value. Now you're increasing the quality of the value. Again, you're working with what you have. Now, let me talk a little bit about these last 2 because generally speaking, they're easier. And I have something that I use with my clients that helps them to find new value that they can provide their clients. And it's called the More Better Value Framework. Here it is. And this is spelled out in a lot of detail in the book. To create more value, there's basically, because it's quantitative, you're talking about more, there's 3 things you can do. You can decrease the amount of money or time or energy that someone has to give you and give them the same benefit. So for less, you get the same. That's more value. Or you can do the opposite. You can keep the investment the same, but you can provide a greater return. All right? Or you can do both. You can lower the cost and provide a greater return. So all 3 of those translate into more value, and people are very happy with that. I know, for example, I'm an Apple user, and I love my iPhone. And it was a wonderful present the first time that Apple upgraded their iOS for me years ago. And there were cool new things I could do in my iPhone, and there was no additional investment required. That was an experience of more value. When Apple released their second iPhone, they lowered the price of the phone. And that's also an experience of more value. So the price dropped, but the same benefit came. Creating better value is a little trickier. Now you're talking about changing the quality of the value. And there's 3 different ways you can do that. One is that you can increase the impact of the value by expanding or multiplying the consequences, the effects, or the influence. So what I mean here is that you're taking the same thing that someone was receiving before, but now it'll do more for them. It'll do more in terms of what it'll influence. It'll do more in terms of the result. It'll do more in terms of what happens as a result of you implementing that product or service. Here's an example of increasing impact. Let's say you're an association, and once a year you bring your biggest performing volunteer leaders to Washington, and you teach them how to advocate for themselves. And you give them a class so that they can go back and they can talk to politicians, they can talk to policymakers, and they can do a good job of influencing their industry. Well, if you want to create better value, when you bring them to Washington, don't just give them a class. Take them up to Capitol Hill and introduce them to their congressperson. Don't charge them more for it. Have it be the same class, but now in addition to learning the skill of advocating, we're actually going to put you in front of somebody who's going to make a difference where you can literally advocate. You've increased the impact. The second way to create better value is to intensify it by amplifying its strength, its power, its potency. Probably one of the most famous examples of this is in the early days of washing detergent. At first you had to have one detergent to do your colors, another one to do your whites, and suddenly we had detergents that did both. Then we had detergents that got out tougher stains. If you intensify the potency of your offering, then that creates better value. And the third one is to extend application by offering a wider variety of uses. So I might say to you, it was the case that you could use your Discover credit card in all these locations in your city, but now you can use the Discover credit card anywhere that someone will take a check. I've now expanded the variety of uses of my Discover credit card. Same credit card, but it can do more. So those are the three things that you use to create better value. And you can mix these. You can say, I'm going to do A, I'm going to decrease the required investment and provide the same benefit, but that same benefit is going to extend to a wider variety of uses. So now I'm combining A with under number 1 with C under number 2. So you can mix and match these and really come up with a lot of different ways of satisfying your customers and giving them things that they're pleased about. That's the more better value framework. I go through a pretty lengthy example in the book that describes a company that's on the rise, that's shifting into a new state in terms of its profitability and its impact, and how they use the more better value framework to generate new ideas for the value they can provide to their customers. All right, the last area is driving innovation uptake. Now what we're looking at is bringing your customers along, making them be part of the innovation process. In the old days, people would innovate and they just throw stuff over the fence and say, here you go, I hope it sells well. These days, customers are part of focus groups when the idea is new. These days, prototypes are being given to customers and they get a chance to try them out. And they're even told that there's an exceptional group, a special group, that they have privileges. And one of those privileges is that they get to see the beta version. They get to see the prototype. So driving innovation uptake is a way to make sure that your innovation succeeds. It's also an early warning indicator. If it's not succeeding, that you shouldn't invest too much in it. You're sharing things with folks and they're not picking up on it, then you can start to modify it so that they do pick up on it. I'm going to share with you 3 different ways that you can drive innovation uptake. The first is what I call a value pulse. And it's a regular infusion of value, like a heartbeat. It comes with a periodicity. It's consistent, never varies. Every so often, there's something new. If you're an Apple person like I am, you can go to the website called macrumors.com and you go to their buyer's guide and it lists all the Apple products and it tells you when the next one is likely to come out, how long it's been since the last one came out, and what the periodicity is of a particular product. So if you're thinking about upgrading your iPhone, it'll actually tell you now's a good time to buy because it's only been 100 days since the last one came out, and usually there's at least 400 days between iPhones. Or it'll say now's a bad time to buy. It's been 365 days, and a new phone will be out next month. Wait till the new one comes out. That's Apple doing value pulses. Systematically, regularly, consistently, they're releasing new value into the marketplace. An e-newsletter is an example of a value pulse. If it's valuable, once a month, once a week, once a year, every 6 months, there's a newsletter that comes out that has important information. Once you've established a value pulse, you can create a value surge. A value surge is where you take a ton of value and you pack it in and push it out dramatically so that people are bowled over. It's something that grabs their attention and helps them do something that they haven't been able to do in a much greater way. So a value surge, you take an existing pulse, it's regular, it's consistent, it's always the same amount, And then at a certain point, you push a tremendous amount of value through it, and that creates a customer base that feels like every once in a while something really spectacular is going to happen. I must stay tuned to this. And then the last is what I call value webs. And value webs are where different products enhance and support each other, or different services do. And again, Apple's a wonderful example of that. You know, I have an iPhone. My wife has an iPhone. We share our calendar. We share our grocery list. It makes possible a lot of things. Now, you know, before all of those things are in place, I might think about getting my wife an Android or a BlackBerry. You know, I might consider that for myself. But now we're locked in. We both want our iPhone because there's these things that both of them do together that's better than what one of them does individually. So a value web takes a lot of those and starts creating value out of having more than one product or service and creating synergies and creating it exponentially by being hooked to many different things. So that's how you drive innovation uptake. And those are the 7 areas that we went through today. Here's my contact information. I'd encourage you to send me an email or go to my website. I have over 400 resources, including the companion workbook for the book that are available free there. Follow me on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. And Facebook. I've got 16,000 likes on Facebook, and half of them are from India. And almost a quarter of them are from Indonesia. So it's a very international space. I'd love to have you all come and join me there. And I'm regularly putting up resources there as well. So that's the end of my presentation. Let me also, I've still got time available, and I'd be happy to answer more questions.
Seth, thank you so much. I think everybody's just continuing to absorb the content from your presentation. I don't have any further questions from folks right now. Let me just give everybody a minute to. Everybody is still online, and actually we've had several people join us throughout your presentation. So let me just give everybody one more chance to ask questions. I think most of the comments I'm receiving on the chat are just how wonderful the presentation was, and how basically a big thank you to you. I think if I unmuted everybody, we would have significant applause.
Well, I want to thank you. Thank you, Jessica. I see your note here. I want to thank you, Denise, also, and Kent State University for the invitation. Aditi, I see a nice thank you from you. It's a real pleasure to speak to you. It's an honor for me, and I appreciate being asked. Thank you very much.
Well, Seth, I hope you will come back.
I will.
I think people want to hear more. So please, anytime you think you have something to share with us, just send us a note and we'll get you on the calendar.
Okie doke.
Well, actually, we have a question from Patricia.
Okay.
Can you give an example of a value web with services?
Yes, there's a lot of examples of value webs with services. Let me think of a service industry. I just had an opportunity to speak at Newstar, N-E-U-S-T-A-R, and the primary service that they provide is the ability to transport your cell phone number when you change cell phones. So if you change from a BlackBerry to an Android, from an iPhone to a BlackBerry, you can keep your same phone number. And that's their space. They are a neutral party. They do it very quickly. I think in the early days it took 2 weeks. Now it takes something like 7 seconds. And they do it around the globe. And they are busy acquiring other organizations right now because they've been growing so much. And they're looking for services that complement their existing service. So they would be services, they primarily serve the telephone companies. So they serve big vendors like Verizon and Comcast. And they're asking the question right now, how do we build services that are going to complement the service that we do right now, porting your telephone number? So their goal, they're actually in a strategic thrust period right now. Their goal is to acquire, and they've already acquired a significant number of organizations, where the services directly support their existing primary value proposition. And then to reciprocate that value proposition so that the current service will then augment the one that they're bringing in. That's a value web approach. They're doing it one at a time, but as soon as they have more than 2, they're in a web. And then the services can start complementing each other. So that's an example of one that just comes to mind quickly. Anything else? Denise, are you still there?
I was talking away and forgot I had muted myself.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
So we don't have any further questions, so let me
All
just
right.
once again thank you so much for the presentation today, and remind you that anytime you want to share something, we'd be delighted to have you back. And remind everybody who is listening in today that the slides and the recorded version will be available on the wiki. So thank you so much, Seth. And I think we will conclude today's webinar.
All right. All the best. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone.